Welcome to the HerdMASTER training video, part 1, where we'll be dealing primarily with the site options of HerdMASTER. This is your login screen where you can choose between your different databases if you're using multiple ones. You can restore from a backup as well and select the demo data. Username and password is what you set when you created the database, and you can keep this user logged in, and that will automatically log in using the username and password that you have set. Here we are in HerdMASTER. Up in the title bar here is where we can see the current version, breed and database name that we're currently working on. In the file menu you can back up data, and we thoroughly recommend regular backups. They are stored in your documents folder under a subfolder called HerdMASTER Backups, and you can alter that in your site options, which we'll go into in a minute. There's Documents, HerdMASTER Backups. Other options in the file menu allow you to change your password, restore data. If you choose log out, then that will take you into the login screen when you next start HerdMASTER, even if you previously had the checkbox checked to auto login. Now we'll open our site options. So in the setup menu, select site options. There are two rows of tabs open initially in site options. These tell HerdMASTER how to operate in the background. We will look at the data entry area first on the Program Settings tab. The first option is to record animal birth dates. The only reason to uncheck this is if you're only recording commercial animals that may not need a birth date. With it checked, it forces you to choose a birth date when you add new animals. Requiring observation codes for weights and traits is useful to have checked as well, as it means you will always know which observation the detail was recorded for, like 200-day weights, etc. Show message box on validation error is checked by default, and it shows you why something couldn't be entered into a field, or why when you tried to process some data it didn't allow it into the program. Recording calving ease has been made compulsory for some societies, and checking this can be quite useful when adding calves, even if your society isn't one of the ones enforcing it, as it is quite useful information to know. If you always weigh animals when they come onto your property, then this checkbox is quite useful, as it forces you to add a weight when you create a new animal. Allow manual animal tag entries for people who are used to older programs such as HerdMagic and wish to type in animal tags rather than selecting them from a list when adding matings, etc. It's unchecked by default because if you're always typing in animal tags, then it's very easy to make a mistake and not notice until you've actually processed a lot of the changes. Enforced batch integrity basically means that if you set up batches for treatments or semen, etc., then you cannot go beyond the amount in that batch. So we could have a batch of 5,000 mils of 7-in-1 treatment, and if you've added it to enough animals, it will stop you from using that batch once you've finished it off, or if not enough is left. The next option allows you to show the average daily weight gain when you're adding weights to an animal, so on the crash side recorder or on the data entry screens. The last option in these checkboxes allows you to enter weights as decimals, so you could have 35.5 kilos for a animal's birth weight. That can be quite useful. Now this option here, Clear Save Grid Layouts, that resets your animal list, so it goes to temp files here, up in those tabs, and we can choose the list that we want to reset to its default state. So if you've edited your animal list and you want to go back to the way it was, you just select that. The next area we'll look at is Startup and Shutdown, the first option being Prompt to confirm on program exit. This is really useful because if you have reports at full screen, They will take up the entire room here and put their exit button just underneath the main program's exit button. The next option is perform integrity checks on startup, and what this does is it goes through your site options and some of your animal details and makes sure that certain things are set, such as default owner, default breeder, the owner and breeder of each animal, default property and site location to work on, and it just double checks that these are set. Your standard contact code is owner, and you can find that in your contacts list up the top. The next option is to disable automatic updates. You'd check this to stop HerdMaster from looking for updates automatically once a week. This would be used if you're on a particularly bad internet connection that's always dropping out. The reason you would disable automatic updates in these circumstances is so that HerdMaster doesn't try to automatically download an update and possibly corrupt HerdMaster. Prompt to sync on start and close is for those of you who are on our cloud-based central sync system. It's useful to leave this checked, as it'll ask you to sync on every program open and close. So every time you open HerdMaster or close it, it'll ask you to sync with the database. So it can be quite useful in keeping your sync up to date and keeping any double entering of data to a minimum. Full screen reports make any reports you generate take up as much room as possible on the screen. This is useful for smaller or lower resolution monitors that you may find on cheaper laptops. So if your screen resolution is less than, say, 1920 by 1080, you may choose to have this on. Just makes the report easier to read, as it takes up more room on the screen. Custom reports allows you to use the custom reporter. This is an older checkbox. It's been updated in our database system. Going back to the full screen reports option, if we had that checked, then all our reports would take up as much room as possible, like so. The next option is search as you type, and it's enabled by default. This allows the animal lists to reduce as you type in the search field. So if you're typing in an animal tag, the list will reduce as you type to just animals that have the characters that you've typed in at the start. The only reason to uncheck this is if you're on a very old system that has a lot of animals and it lags when you're typing in an animal tag. Otherwise, it's quite a useful feature. Now we move on to your breed society setup, otherwise known as breed group code or BGC. All the breeds you are working with should be available from the drop down, and you may add or remove additional breeds by using these links to the right of the drop down. This is an important area as it's part of the site options, tells HerdMaster basic information about your society, what format to send data to them in, the email address to send regos to, traits and other breed specific details. The details screen options allow you to customize what tabs are active when you open an animal's details. The first drop down is for what tab to open on in the bottom half of the animal details window. As you can see, there are quite a few options. If I always wanted to be able to see an animal's groups or owner and breeder code, I could set this to additional. If I was usually looking at my adjusted weight ratios or movements, then I could just as easily set those tabs to display. One thing to remember is that these tabs are active when you open an animal's details, so be careful that you don't accidentally change some information if you open an animal's details and just start typing. The second visible drop down is for the tabs at the top right of the animal details windows, which are mostly the breed society related ones, so EBVs, breed object, indices, society ID, etc. So if I was always looking at an animal's DNA or birth year, I could select the breed info option from the drop down list. Whereas if I always looked at EBVs on individual animals, I would select the EBVs tab to display. Same with breed object, pictures, data, defects. There are some options here which are only valid for particular countries, such as NATE and darting. which are unique to New Zealand and South Africa. The advantage of these options is that it can save you a second or two whenever you look at an animal, and this can add up to quite a bit of time over the course of a year. You can also select the tab you wish to always appear when looking at details of your contacts from your contacts list, so people you sell to. So if we're always looking at someone's PIC number or herd ID, we could select the additional tab here. If we wanted to look at their business number, we could select contact info, and that address contains their address as well as email addresses and other such details. Now over here we can set whether the contact and animal details windows are open in new windows, or if they will just overrun whatever detail window is currently open. You would have this unchecked if you had a low resolution monitor and the windows did not fit well next to each other. Having this checked can be useful for both contacts and animal details, as it means you could display multiple contacts or animals in windows next to each other and compare them. You would do this simply by having your list open and hitting the details button, or double clicking, and then using the list to then select a different animal or contact and display their details. If this option is unchecked, the first details window that showed up would be changed to the second one when you selected it. The next option makes HerdMaster open the animal lists and details screens in full screen, similar to what we could do with the reports earlier. Again, this is mostly used for computers that have low resolution monitors where space can be very tight. When you open them, they'll expand to fill the entirety of the blue space in the background. So you will still have the buttons on the right panel here. Just be careful because the close button for the list will be right below the close button of HerdMaster. So make sure you left prompt to confirm on program exit checked if you're going to have this on. Now we'll look at the first Program Defaults tab. This tab deals mostly with new animal settings and auto-generation of fields. In the ID formats area, we will see the auto-generation settings for Society ID and Tattoo. If we were just using the animal's Society ID for a tag, we could just switch on Use Animal Tag Copy for auto-gen. This would just copy whatever our tag was into those fields on any new animal, rather than generating them from the formats that we can set up. This area may look slightly different on yours, as it may say Society ID instead of Default ID. Here we can see the Society ID. Here's our tattoo. This is what's actually sent to the Society when you register an animal. We can customize these quite easily to whatever the Society requires, so that way when you create an animal it can automatically create a tattoo and a Society ID that will be recognized by your Society. Each character here represents a character of information that HerdMaster gets from your animal's details. These codes are listed in the tip sheet. For example, the Ys are characters of birth year. We can change how this works simply by hitting the Customize link. And now we'll get the tag format window, and as you can see we're on Society ID already. Here is our format as it is currently. 2 Ys to signify year number, an A that means year letter like K calves, etc., and 3 Ns that mean a 3-digit 0 padded number. So a calf born in 2013 with the tag of K42 would have a Society ID of 13K042. Now if we wanted to add more of these characters, we would select them here in the drop down. The left column has the character, and the right column tells you what information it adds to the ID format. Numbers work right to left as you add the characters. Here we have breeder number and breeder number stripped. A stripped character means that it removes excess spaces, or in the case of numbers, any zeros at the front of the number. Down in Format Preview we have all the information we need to test our ID, so let's make a new one by hitting Clear and clearing it out. First we'll add some H's for each character of a breeder ID or herd ID. As you can see, it's mimicking the breeder field in the preview area. Adding more H's will just add spaces, as there are no more characters to our breeder field in the preview. We can see this if we add a couple Y's afterward. See? So if we bring this back to 3 breeder characters and 2 year numbers, we'll see that we now have the 2 characters from the end of the birth year. We can add all of these fields using the characters in the drop-down lists. There are also special characters like slashes if your ID format needs them. Ignore characters will ignore the characters at the start of your animal tag. So, using all of these characters from the drop-down, you can build up a format for generating your IDs and see how it'll play out using the preview area. You can use several different kinds of character for the same information, such as sex number or sex character. But for the moment, I'll show you 0 padded numbers. So these numbers padded out to however many characters you have, just putting zeros in front. So as we can see, we've gone to 4 digits now when it's actually only a 3-digit number. Just by adding an extra N, it's added zeros. You can do the same thing with 0 stripped numbers, but this removes any zeros from the front of the number. So we can add a ton of Z characters and we still only have the number 1. But if we change our number to 101, you see it still leaves the 0 in the middle, but removes any zeros from the front. So let's clear this out and create a new tag format. First, grab the breeder number, 3 codes, then we'll grab a year letter. Putting 2 of these in doesn't do anything because I only use 1 year letter in my animal tag. Now to finish off, I'll make the last part a 3-digit 0 padded number, so it'll always be 3 digits. As you can see, changing the birth year doesn't do anything to my preview because we haven't used a Y character for year number in there. But if I change to my year letter on my animal tag, it changes the ID immediately. Year letter will always grab the character from your animal tag that is immediately before the animal number. Now if we want, we can add a sex code character by putting the S character into our format. We can do the same thing for grade or any of the other values. Tattoo is what is sent to the Breed Society when you register animals. We edit this in the exact same manner as we just did for Society ID. Typically you will not need to edit these as they'll be set when you select your breed in HerdMaster, but if you are using an unusual management tag system, then it may be necessary. You can create new formats by hitting the Add button and set a particular format to default using the buttons on the right. If we have created new formats, they will be available from the drop-down lists here. Now moving on to the new animal defaults, this area sets up what you would like to have auto-added to an animal when it is created in your system. Here we can select sex, so any new animal I create will automatically have sex set to female. I recommend selecting a sex as it means around half the time you will not need to change it. By default it is set to unknown. F steer is a sex for a female steer or non-breeding female. The AutoGen Next tag checkbox at the top means that it will take the last tag you input on an animal and increment the tag number by 1 and then use that as the suggested tag for the new animal. So we select our sex, the default was unknown, we select female, now we select owner or breeder. Now usually in HerdMaster you'll use the code owner for both breeder and owner. Herd IDs, pick numbers and other details are stored in your owner code, which can be found in the top menu under Contacts, View Edit Contacts. We can select 2 default group codes for new animals. We can put in a default registration status. We can also put in a prefix so that if we have a property or stud name we want in front of the animal's suffix or as part of every new animal's name, we can put that in there. Most of these are pretty self-explanatory. Colour, horn status. Hopefully your carving ease can be set as a default of 1. Again, this can save you a bit of time whenever you're adding a calf. If you're a breed plan member, then changing the new animal's performance group to the same as that of your main herd would be a good idea. Now up in the top right we have our default observation codes for specific dates. Typically most people will not need to change this at all. Observation codes are used to tell HerdMaster which observation you are recording weights or traits for. For example, W2 is the weaning observation, so if you weighed an animal at weaning, you would assign it an obs code of W2. This area of setup allows you to change the standard obs codes for these times to different codes. These observations are also used in background calculations for HerdMaster, like adjusted weight ratios, so if you need to do more recordings, then you could create another obs code for in-between observations, or a carcass obs code to input your carcass traits from the abattoir. Now we'll move on to Program Defaults 2. The first area here is Calving Year Defaults. We can select whether we're operating on the financial year or on a standard year. You'll notice at the bottom it tells you when the financial year goes from and to. This changes the birth year, not the date of birth of an animal. So if it is born on the 2nd of the 7th 2014 in the financial year, it will have a birth year of 2015. The custom option is for countries other than Australia, where the financial year may end at a different date. To adjust to a custom financial year, simply select Custom and put in how many months back it is, so 4 months back for example. Calving season is mostly used by American breeders who have one calving season per year, and their society asks for that information on the animals. Gestation length is the average gestation time for your herd. This operates a lot in the background of HerdMaster, affecting days to calving calculations, preg tests, mating selection, and a lot of other areas. So if you can figure out what your stud's average is and put it in here, it can help your reporting, and a lot of the automated areas of HerdMaster will just work a little more accurately. Animal registration allows for registration of a calf where the sire or dam are not society animals. Generally only have these checked if you have permission from your society to do so. Can be useful for your base animals in a society, and for animals where you might be getting DNA results later. Pregnancy test default time measurement only changes what the field for the preg tests is labelled as. So once you set this, don't change it, as it will not convert your previous recordings to the new time measurement. Typically I would recommend leaving this as weeks. Weight ranges are the valid extremes of weights you can put in for particular observations. So if I had show validation errors checked on the first screen we looked at, and tried to enter a weight for birth weight that was 10 kilograms, it would give me a flashing red warning symbol unless I changed the lower attribute to 10. So if weights are outside these ranges, it will warn you about them. This is to prevent data entry errors like accidentally hitting another button after you've entered a weight. A lot of times I've almost entered a birth weight of 350 kilos instead of 35, and this system has stopped me from putting in that incorrect data. It's a good idea to change these limits to that of your individual herd, as these values will be different from property to property, let alone between different species. Require fate date checkbox just forces you to include a date if you try to give an animal a society fate. So if you say that it's, dead from an accident, then you'll have to put in the date that you discovered it. Use legacy backups allows you to use backups from older versions of HerdMaster. This is checked by default. The default backup location tries to open that location set as a default whenever you use the backup option in your file menu, or whenever HerdMaster tries to get you to backup automatically. The default embryo age is inserted into a new embryo's details whenever you are creating them. So in this case, if I created a new embryo in my inventory, it would automatically insert the age as 7 days old. If all your embryos are always going to be older or younger, then change this to the most appropriate average for your business. Weigh graph defaults deals with how weight graphs are generated. If HerdMaster cannot find a birth weight, the default birth weight is what it is assumed to be for the graph generation. So if your herd has an average birth weight of 35 or 30 kilos, then you could enter that. So if you never got to weigh at birth, the system assumes the default. The default chart type allows you to select which starting weight to use for the chart, either a birth weight or the first weight taken on an animal. Default will auto-select the one most appropriate for the animal. Now we can move on to Program Defaults 3. The first up here is movement validation and allow multiple movements to the same location. When unchecked, HerdMaster will ignore any movements to a location the animal is already in. When checked, it will add the movement anyway. The reason for having this option is because we have clients who use the movements for logging each month an animal is in a paddock for agistment and feed purposes. The reason we have it unchecked by default is because usually you don't want to have to wade through tons of movement records to find out when an animal was initially moved into a paddock or location. You shouldn't need to touch the century year range because it is just telling HerdMaster what to interpret a 2-digit year as being between. And hopefully by 2029 we have a new version out. Weight ratios and allow multi-breed calculation. If you are using multiple different breeds within HerdMaster, then when you would normally generate adjusted weight ratios, it would not rank different breeds against each other. Different breeds have different rates of growth, and as such, generally if you want to get an idea of how a particular line or animal within that breed is performing, you would not rank it in against a different breed as well. However, for reasons like targeting crossbreed animal performance, seeing which breed is performing better on the whole, or any other reason for ranking the entire herd together, this checkbox allows that to happen with the adjusted ratio calculations. The EBV import options are usually used by particular societies, with the ability to update some of the animal details when you import EBV files. As long as the animal referred to in the EBV file is found, these checkboxes allow other details to be updated. Adding calves has two very useful options in it. The first is give new calves the same group as their dams. So if a dam belongs to particular group codes in HerdMaster, these will be passed along to the calf. If a dam is in a worksheet, the calves will already be automatically added to those worksheets anyway. Show rego status of sire dam when adding calves simply adds the rego status next to the sire or dam name when you're adding a calf. This can be particularly useful for society animals. Auto-calculate grade is a useful area in that it allows you to set up the rules by which a grade on a calf is reached, depending on the sire and dam grade codes. It isn't used much in Australia, but it is in South Africa and various other regions. This link under the mouse is where we get into our grade auto-calculation rules. So to create a new calculation, we just hit the Add button, pop in our dam's grade, our sire's grade, and what grade that will equal for the calf. It is recommended to have the grade codes already created in HerdMaster, however you can type into the fields themselves if you need to. If your society does not use them, you could always create your own to keep track of breeding lines or other information in HerdMaster. Now on to the Reminders tab. The reminder system is a really handy system. It brings any due reminders up when you start HerdMaster. It displays any due reminders on the crush side recorder when you're recording an animal. The top checkbox enables the reminder system. The second checkbox tells HerdMaster how long before a reminder is due that it should start to display it, the default being 7 days. It is important to remember that a reminder has an expiry date as well as a due date, so any reminders that have not been marked as done will still disappear if their expiry date has passed. The next options allow for auto creation of reminders, so we can have HerdMaster automatically remind us about weaning weighings, yearling weighings, preg tests, all based off when we recorded other information. We can customise the amount of time before the reminder comes into effect. Due date reminders are one of the areas that use our gestation length on the Program Defaults 2 tab. This is a great one if you record preg tests, because then you will get a notification to be looking for new calves around when they're due. Now on to the Matings tab. Our first option warns us if our inbreeding coefficient is too high. It is currently set to 0.25 or 25%. So if a mating will result in offspring that is 25% or more inbred, then HerdMaster will bring up a warning when trying to process it. For example, if you wanted to set this to 12.5%, simply enter the field and change it to 0.125, and there's our 12.5%. 0.06 would be 6%. Obviously this is only accurate to the animals you have in HerdMaster. The more pedigree you have in the program, the greater accuracy it'll get. However, due to the fact that your breed society should have every society animal registered with them, then any calculator on their website is probably going to be a bit more accurate than the internal one within HerdMaster. So use it as a rough guide. The next area is our advanced options, such as use advanced breed plan mating options, DTC. Now our standard mating screen looks like this. One page, got all your mating types on it and all the information. That checkbox that we just looked at changes the matings data entry screen and forces recording of everything needed for breed plan submission, like performance groups. As you can see, it has split different types of matings up onto different tabs. I have customers of commercial farms that prefer to have the mating screen in this layout anyway, even if they have to record performance groups. Otherwise, everything on these screens remains the same. You just have to remember to record performance groups and all your breed plan information. Our next checkbox allows us to select the correct mating when inputting preg tests. This is very useful as it assigns the correct mating and fails all others. So when you eventually come to record calves, you only have the right mating to choose from. DTC fates are not society fates. They're fates sent into breed plan that tell them what is going on with an animal. So if a dam got a parasite and you removed her from your breeding females, not only could you put her into a different performance group, but you could tell breed plan why she's in a different performance group. Not all fates are fatal, and currently it is not compulsory to send the information in. However, it will give breed plan more information to work with when determining the statistics of your herd. The next option is the intercalving period warning. This stops you from adding another calf to an animal if it has already had one within the last X amount of days. Having this on is useful in that it stops you adding a calf you may have already added or assigning the incorrect dam to a calf. Recording dead calves is very important in any herd management, as it means you don't penalise a dam's fertility if a calf has been bitten by a snake. The opposite is also true. If a dam is carrying through to pregnancy and the calves are just not surviving, you need to know about it. You could also see if a particular sire or line is having a lot of calves that don't survive. So it can be very important. Auto-creating dead calves can save time when adding a calf, as it will tag them with the tag dead and increment a number afterwards. When you record a calf and enter the number in birth as 0, then instead of bringing up the new animal screen, it brings up a very short window that allows you to enter the society fate code and date it died on. It automatically makes it off-site and inactive in your animal list when you're finished, and you can alter the prefix of the tag to whatever you wish. It is unlikely that as users you will ever use the temp file screen for anything other than resetting your animal list back to the default view by clearing the save grid layout. But if space is very limited on your system, then we may instruct you to use some of these clear buttons to clear out temporary files. The NLIS tab is for a program to send anonymous information on regularity of retagging to NLIS, as they are currently undertaking a study into tag retention rates in animals. You can view the log and view any data that has been submitted. This is obviously for Australia only. The CSRU, or crush side recording utility, has a setup page in here that tells it how to operate. The RFID test mode should be unchecked, as we only use that for testing. Use PNP devices will usually be unchecked, as plug-and-play is yet to be used widely in the agricultural devices market for transmission of live data, so weights directly from the scale straight into your computer. These drop-downs tell the crush side recording utility what to do when it encounters an animal that has been given the same treatment or had the same trait recorded against it on the same day. So we can tell it to prompt us for a decision, always duplicate the procedural trait, or never duplicate. This is useful if your animal comes back through the crush again for a second time, and the crush side recording utility is trying to record traits and treatments. Down here we have checkboxes of what information to display, and at the bottom we have several options for how the program will operate in different circumstances. We can tell it to blank out the worksheet each time an animal is read, require a sex code or date of birth, show reminders, auto-generate a tag from an electronic ID when you read in new animals, auto-create new animals when an unassigned tag is read. Use sounds means that whenever a weight is brought into the crush recorder, the computer will beep. If you have a Gallagher scale, I recommend turning this off, as they send the weight twice every second by default, and the computer will beep each time that happens, so it can get a bit annoying. This whole section is covered in more detail in the crush side recording manual. So now on to manual devices. This is where we set up what scales we have and which COM port on the computer that they are using, so that when we use our crush side recording utility, it knows how to get the information from the device. So we just select the correct device from our drop-down list. We can create new devices and set up all their communication protocols in a different area, but that can be quite complex, so it will be covered later, or if you're having difficulties, just give us a call. COM is the drop-down listing all the COM ports available on your computer. You need the correct port to tell Windows where to get information from. So on to the next tab, Entry Screen Colors. Both the Data Entry Action template window and the crush side recording utility can use customized colors set up here. So you can set up high visibility colors for when you're entering data. For example, you could use a really bright background and dark text, so you can quickly see where you have to enter information on the windows themselves. The next tab is for invoicing options. This is where you set up the presets for invoices if you choose to use the system within HerdMASTER for them. You can give invoice numbers a prefix such as invoice hash or inv hash, and you can zero pad the invoice number out to a specific number of places. Direct debit payment instructions is where you would put any message, like payment instructions, on every invoice. It's also a good place to put a generic thank you message to the customer. The next tab is On-Farm Growth Test, Phase D. This area was implemented for South Africa. If you need help with this area, please contact our local representatives in South Africa, Agri-BSA. The next section, Proxy Settings, is for those of you who may be behind a corporate firewall or other lockdown networks where you have to use a proxy server to access the internet. To do this, just hit Proxy Server, and you can use your Internet Explorer settings if they're already set up, or if you have to put it in manually, Just type it into the proxy URL. Down below, use Internet Explorer settings. That's it for this training video. Thanks for watching.